terrifying. The most powerful man in New York, in front of 800 of the city's most elite guests, forces the woman carrying his 6-month pregnant child to kneel on the ice-cold marble floor. Then he gives the order. A bucket of freezing ice water is dumped straight over her head. "You're nothing but a mistake," he declares, voice cold as ice. A cheap little distraction. I've been far too slow to correct. The entire ballroom holds its breath. Phones are raised to record. Scattered laughter ripples from lips adorned with diamonds. That woman, drenched, trembling, clutching her swollen belly, lifts her face to look at the man she once loved more than life itself. And in his eyes there is no contempt. Only pain. A pain so deep it's as if he himself is the one being torn apart right there. So why? Why would a man deliberately destroy the woman he loves most? Right in the middle of the most lavish Christmas night the city has ever seen. The answer will make your skin crawl, and it might just bring you to tears. Before we dive into this chilling and mysterious story, please remember to subscribe to the channel Alex Truths and like this video. Every subscription, like and share from you is a huge spiritual gift and an incredibly profound source of motivation for the channel's growth, so we can continue bringing wonderful videos every day to everyone. There would be no greater joy than receiving your love and support through the comments you leave right below this video. Comments sharing your emotions, or telling us which province or city you're living and working in while listening to this story. Alright, let's continue together and immerse ourselves in this amazing, captivating story that's filled with deep emotions. The snow fell in thick, relentless sheets outside the Capitale Grand Ballroom, in the heart of Manhattan, New York City, on a bitter December evening in the year 2025. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of fresh-cut evergreens, cinnamon, and expensive champagne. Towering Christmas trees glittered with thousands of crystal ornaments, their lights reflecting off polished marble floors like captured stars. A live jazz band played soft holiday melodies, silent night variations that floated above the murmur of 800 of the city's elite, all dressed in velvet gowns, tailored tuxedos, and diamond necklaces that caught the light like tiny fires. I stood near the edge of the grand ballroom, my hands clasped tightly over my swollen belly, trying to make myself small. My name is Elena Thompson, and at 28 years old, I felt like the poorest ghost in a room full of kings and queens. My red velvet dress, bought secondhand from a thrift shop in Brooklyn for $15, was too thin for the cold that seeped through the grand doors every time someone entered. It clung to my frame, which had grown painfully thin over the past months. I hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. The baby kicked weakly now, as if even she knew we were running on fumes. My shoes were cracked leather flats that let the chill in, and my hair, once thick and shining, hung limp and unwashed because the shelter's hot water had run out again last week. I had come here because Victor Rossi had insisted. "It's our Christmas party, Elena," he'd said that morning in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, his voice low and warm as he brushed a strand of hair from my face. "You belong by my side." His touch had sent a shiver through me, not from cold, but from the way his fair-skinned fingers lingered, gentle yet possessive. Victor was everything. I wasn't wealthy beyond imagination, powerful in ways I could only guess at, and so strikingly handsome with his sharp jaw, piercing blue eyes, and fair complexion that spoke of old American money mixed with something darker, something Italian-American that ran deep in New York's shadows. He owned half the construction sites in the 5 boroughs, controlled unions, ran nightclubs that never closed. People whispered MAFIA when his name came up, but no one said it to his face. Yet here I was, 6 months pregnant, standing alone while he laughed with Sophia Kane across the room. Sophia was everything I could never be. Tall, elegant, her black, sequined gown hugging curves I had lost to hunger and sleepless nights on park benches before Victor found me again. She wore diamonds that could have fed me and the baby for years. Her laughter rang out like breaking glass as she leaned into him. My heart twisted. I had been so grateful when Victor reappeared in my life 3 months ago, after I had fled him years earlier in terror of the world he lived in. He had promised change, promised protection, promised love. I had believed him because the alternative was another winter on the streets, another night wondering if the baby would survive the cold. But tonight felt wrong. The way people stared at me, the poor girl from nowhere, who had somehow captured the attention of Victor Rossi. The whispers followed me like shadows. "Who is she? Look at that dress. She looks half-starved." Then Victor's voice cut through the jazz like a blade. "Elena." He stood on the raised platform near the massive Christmas tree, microphone in hand, his tuxedo impeccable. The room quieted. All eyes turned to me. "Come here, sweetheart," he said, his tone deceptively gentle. My legs trembled as I walked forward. The marble floor felt like ice under my thin soles. The baby kicked once hard as if warning me. When I reached him, he smiled that slow, devastating smile that had once made me feel seen. But tonight it didn't reach his eyes. Instead, something dark flickered there, a storm I couldn't name. "Kneel," he said softly. The word landed like a slap. I froze. The room held its breath. Victor tilted his head as if waiting for me to obey. Sophia stepped forward, a crystal bucket of ice water in her manicured hands meant for champagne, chilling now repurposed for cruelty. My knees buckled before I could stop them. The marble was hard, unforgiving. Pain shot through my legs, but worse was the humiliation burning in my chest. I wrapped my arms around my belly, shielding the life inside me. "Why?" I whispered, my voice so small it barely carried. It came out timid, polite, the way I had learned to speak to people who held power over me, people older, richer, stronger. Victor looked down at me, and for a split second something cracked in his expression. Guilt, raw and violent, flashing across his handsome face like lightning. His jaw clenched, his fists tightened at his sides. Inside, I imagined the war, the man who had held me through nightmares, who had whispered promises in the dark, battling the monster, who needed to maintain control, to show the room who ruled. But the moment passed, because he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You need to remember your place." Sophia laughed high and cruel. She lifted the bucket. The water came down in a freezing cascade. It shocked my skin, soaked through the thin velvet, plastered my hair to my face. I gasped, the cold seizing my lungs. The baby kicked wildly, protesting. Ice cubes clattered around me on the marble like broken promises. The room erupted, gasps, nervous laughter, phones raised to capture every second. No one moved to help. No one spoke up. I knelt there, drenched, shivering, my teeth chattering. My mind spun in dizzying circles. Horror clawed at me. How had it come to this? I had been so desperate, sleeping in abandoned subway cars, begging for change outside diners. My body aching from hunger. My nights filled with wind that cut through my thin coat like knives. I had sold my mother's old locket just to buy prenatal vitamins. And now this. Victor's voice continued calm, almost bored. Elena was a nice distraction. A pretty face to make me look human. But let's be honest. This, he gestured to me, kneeling, soaked, broken, this is the truth. A mistake I should have corrected long ago. His words tore through me. Inside my chest, something shattered. Confusion, fear, numbness washed over me in waves. I felt myself sway, dizzy, the room tilting. My vision blurred with tears and water. Yet even as pain consumed me, a deeper torment rose. Why did his eyes keep flicking to mine with that haunted look? Why did his hands tremble slightly as he spoke? I saw it, the guilt eating him alive, the remorse like a knife twisting in his gut. He hated this. He hated himself. But he continued, driven by whatever dark code ruled his world. Sophia stepped closer, smirking. "Pathetic," she said. "Did you really think a man like Victor would stay with someone like you? Someone who brings nothing but neediness?" I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't hold. I collapsed back to my knees, pain shooting through my bruised shins. The baby kicked again, harder, frantic. Panic surged. Was she okay? Was I losing her here in this glittering hell? Victor watched. His face was a mask, but inside, oh God, I could almost feel it, the violent conflict raging. Love and duty clashing like thunder. He had loved me once fiercely from the first moment he saw me serving coffee in that rundown Brooklyn diner. My apron stained. My smile tired but real. That love had never died. It burned in him now, consuming, possessive, tearing him apart as he stood there orchestrating my destruction. But he didn't stop it. The jazz band had stopped playing. Silence pressed in heavy as the snow outside. I looked up at him through dripping lashes, my voice barely a whisper. "Victor, please, the baby." For one heartbeat, his mask slipped completely. Remorse flooded his features, deep, gnawing, violent. His chest rose and fell sharply. He wanted to reach for me, I could see it. He wanted to pull me up, wrap me in his coat, take me away from this nightmare he had created. But the room watched. The power he held demanded this performance. He turned away, and in that moment my world narrowed to the cold marble, the freezing water, the kicking child inside me, and the shattering realization that the man I loved, the man who had once promised to protect me, had just broken me in front of everyone. The inner storm raged harder. Fear, shame, despair. Yet beneath it all, a tiny, stubborn spark of curiosity. Why did he look like he was the one drowning? Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, my heart broke quietly, violently, in the most absurdly unfair way possible. The water still dripped from my hair, pooling around my knees on the cold marble floor of the Capitol Grand Ballroom. Each drop felt like a tiny accusation marking time, while the jazz band remained silent, and the 800 guests watched in a hush that was louder than any scream. My red velvet dress clung to me like a second icy skin, heavy with humiliation. The baby inside me had gone quiet after that last frantic kick, and the stillness terrified me more than the cold. I pressed my palms harder against my belly, willing her to move to tell me she was still fighting. Victor stood above me, microphone still in his hand, his broad shoulders blocking the light from the massive crystal chandelier. His tuxedo was flawless black wool, so fine it caught the glow like oil on water. The cufflinks alone, simple platinum squares engraved with tiny Roman numerals, probably cost more than every possession I had ever owned in my entire life combined. And yet here I was on my knees before him, the poorest thing in the room, shivering so violently my teeth clicked together. He looked down at me. For one long, agonizing second, his blue eyes met mine, and I saw the storm inside him again, raw, tearing, almost violent. His jaw muscle jumped. His free hand flexed at his side as though he were physically restraining himself from reaching for me. I could almost hear the war in his chest. The man who had once carried me piggyback through the rain after my shift at the diner, because my shoes had fallen apart against the king, who could not afford to show weakness in front of the wolves, who circled his empire. Then he spoke, and the gentleness vanished. Elena was useful once, he said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent ballroom. A sweet little waitress who made me look approachable. Human, the kind of girl people photograph with sympathy instead of fear. He gave a small, bitter laugh that didn't reach his eyes. But let's not pretend anymore. This, he gestured to me again, the soaked dress, the swollen belly, the trembling arms wrapped protectively around our child. This was never meant to last. A temporary illusion. A mistake I'm finally correcting tonight. The words landed like punches, each one deeper than the last. My breath caught. Mistake. The baby. Me. All of it reduced to a single disposable word. I tried to speak, but my throat was too tight, too raw from the cold and the crying I hadn't allowed myself yet. When the sound finally came out, it was barely audible, soft and timid. The voice I used when asking shelter workers for an extra blanket, when thanking strangers for spare change on the subway platform. Victor, please, I whispered. I carried your child. I thought you wanted this. Us. His gaze flickered again, sharp, almost pained. Inside him, I knew the guilt was clawing, ripping at the walls he had built so carefully. He had loved me once. I had felt it in the way he kissed my forehead at 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep because the shelter was too loud, too cold. I had seen it in the quiet way he slipped cash into my coat pocket when he thought I wasn't looking enough to buy real food for weeks. That love had been fierce, consuming, burning. From the very first night he walked into the diner on Flatbush Avenue, soaked from a sudden autumn downpour, and asked for coffee and whatever smile you've got left. But now he was choosing the mask. Sophia stepped closer, her heels clicking triumphantly. She placed a manicured hand on his arm, possessive, territorial. She actually believed you, she said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. How adorable. Did you really think a man like Victor Rossi would settle for someone who smells like desperation and cheap thrift store perfume? The laughter started again, scattered at first, then spreading like wildfire. Phones stayed raised. No one lowered them. No one came forward. My vision blurred. Dizziness swept over me in sickening waves. I swayed on my knees, the marble seeming to tilt beneath me. My arms felt numb. My legs had gone to sleep. The baby still hadn't moved again, and panic clawed up my throat like broken glass. I remembered the nights before Victor found me again, sleeping curled against the heating grate outside the Brooklyn Public Library, wind slicing through my thin jacket, waking every hour because my fingers had gone numb, selling plasma twice a week just to afford the bus fare to prenatal appointments, eating half a granola bar for breakfast, and telling myself it was enough. The shelter had turned me away 3 nights in a row because they were full, and I had walked the streets until dawn, whispering apologies to the baby for not being able to keep her warm. And now this. Victor cleared his throat. When he spoke again, his voice was colder, practiced. The child was never part of the plan. A complication. A chain I didn't ask for. He paused, letting the words sink in. Elena, you served your purpose. Now it's time to go. The room seemed to shrink. The glittering trees, the champagne flutes, the velvet drapes, all of it blurred into a mocking backdrop for my destruction. I felt small, smaller than I had ever felt on the streets. At least out there, the cruelty had been impersonal. This was deliberate, personal, chosen. Yet even as shame burned through me, suspicion flickered, small, fragile, but growing. Why did his voice crack on the last word? Why did his eyes keep darting to my face, then away, as though looking too long would undo him? Why did his hand tremble when he passed the microphone to a waiter? I lifted my head slowly, water still, dripping from my chin. You said you loved me, I whispered. My voice was so soft, so polite, the way I spoke to doctors, to caseworkers, to anyone who held my fate. That first night in the diner, you said I was the only real thing you'd ever touched. For one heartbeat, the mask shattered. Victor's face twisted open, remorse violent and ugly. His chest heaved once, twice. His eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had once looked at me like I was the only light left in New York, were glassy now. He opened his mouth, closed it. The internal war was there for anyone who knew him to see the powerful man who ruled half the city's shadows torn to pieces by the woman kneeling at his feet. He loved me. I knew it then, in that frozen second. Loved me so fiercely, it hurt him to breathe. Loved me enough that staging this nightmare must have felt like carving out his own heart. But the Empire demanded performance. The rivals, watching from shadowed corners, demanded weakness be punished. And so he stood there bleeding inside while I bled outside. Then the moment passed. He turned his back. "Get her out of here," he said quietly to the security team waiting near the stage. "She doesn't belong." 2 men in black suits stepped forward. One reached for my arm. I flinched away instinctively, curling tighter around my belly. "Don't touch me," I breathed. My voice shook. "Please, just don't." They hesitated. Even they could see the broken thing on the floor. Victor didn't look back. Outside somewhere beyond the grand doors, I heard tires screech, sharp, sudden. Shouts followed. A tense exchange, low and furious. I caught fragments. "Rossi's men, not tonight, back off or we start something we can't finish." Another confrontation. Another faction testing boundaries. Victor's world never slept. But inside the ballroom, the only war that mattered was the one tearing me apart from the inside. I stayed on my knees, soaked, shivering, powerless. And in the silence that followed his words, something inside me began to fracture irreparably. Confusion, giving way to numbness. Numbness, giving way to a deep, violent sorrow that felt like dying slowly. Yet beneath it all, the tiniest, most dangerous ember still glowed curiosity. Why did he look like the one who had been betrayed? The ballroom lights blurred into streaks as the dizziness took hold, my body swaying like a reed in winter wind. I stayed on my knees because standing felt impossible, because the marble seemed safer than facing the eyes that still watched me. The water had stopped dripping from my dress, but the cold had settled deep into my bones, joining the older cold I carried from years of nights, spent curled on cardboard beneath overpasses, or huddled against chain-link fences in empty lots. My mind fled the present, running backward through the months and years like someone escaping a burning building. It began in the autumn of 2023, on a rainy Tuesday evening, in a 24-hour diner on Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn. The place smelled of burnt coffee and fryer grease. I was 26, then working the graveyard shift for minimum wage, plus whatever tips the late-night crowd felt generous enough to leave. My uniform was faded blue polyester, the apron permanently stained with ketchup and coffee. My shoes had holes in the soles. Every step on the wet tile floor sent icy water soaking through my socks. I was already thin, then too thin, but the real hunger hadn't started yet. That came later. Victor walked in at 2 a.m, rain dripping from his dark overcoat, fair skin flushed from the cold. He looked out of place among the usual crowd of cab drivers and insomniacs. Too clean, too expensive. His watch caught the fluorescent light, something heavy silver, the kind that probably cost more than my yearly rent. He sat in my section. "Coffee," he said. "Black. And whatever you've got that's hot." I poured the coffee with hands that trembled slightly from fatigue. When I set the mug down, he looked up at me, really looked, and something in his blue eyes softened. "You're soaked," he said quietly. I shrugged, the polite, timid smile I'd perfected for customers who might tip. "It's just rain, sir." He studied me a moment longer. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a thick wad of cash, hundreds crisp and new. He peeled off 5 and slid them across the counter. "Take the rest of the night off," he said. "Go home. Get warm." I stared at the money. $500. More than I made in 2 weeks. "I can't," I whispered. "I need the hours." He didn't argue. He simply waited until my shift ended at 6, then followed me outside into the gray dawn. He offered me his coat. I took it because I was shaking so hard I could barely walk straight. That was the beginning. Over the next weeks, he came back every night I worked. Sometimes he ordered food he didn't eat. Sometimes he just sat watching me move between tables with that quiet intensity. He learned my name. He learned I lived in a single room above a laundromat that never turned off its dryers. He learned I sent what little money I could spare to my aunt in Ohio, who was raising my younger sister after our parents died in a car accident when I was 19. He never once asked for anything in return. Then one night when the diner was empty and the rain hammered the windows, he told me his name. "Victor Rossi." he said as though it should mean something. It didn't. Not then, but later when I searched his name on the cracked screen of my old phone, the whispers appeared. Construction, empires, union, control, nightclubs that never closed, rumors of shadows behind the legitimate businesses. Mafia, the word made my stomach drop. I confronted him the next night. Is it true? I asked, voice, small, polite, terrified. He didn't lie. Some of it, he said. Not all. I'm trying to build something clean. Something real. I believed him because I wanted to. Because for the first time in years, someone saw me not the tired waitress, not the girl with holes in her shoes, but me. He started taking care of things quietly. A new winter coat left on my doorstep. Groceries delivered when my fridge was empty. Money for the electric bill when the power company threatened to shut me off. He never made me feel like charity. He made me feel chosen. Then came the night I saw the violence. We were walking back to my room after my shift. A black SUV pulled up suddenly. 2 men stepped out, hard faces, expensive suits. Words were exchanged low and furious. One of them reached inside his jacket. Victor moved faster than I could process. A single sharp motion. The man staggered back. No blood, no sound, just sudden stillness. Victor turned to me, face calm, but his eyes were wild. Go inside, he said. I ran. I didn't see him for 3 months after that. When he found me again, I was sleeping on the subway using my coat as a blanket. The baby already growing inside me from one desperate, reckless night we'd shared before I fled. I was thinner, hungrier. The shelter had turned me away again. The wind had been merciless that winter, cutting through layers, stealing sleep, stealing hope. He carried me to his car without a word. He took me to his penthouse overlooking Central Park. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows. Heat that felt like a miracle after so many nights of frost. He didn't ask questions. He just held me while I cried. I never stopped looking, he whispered against my hair. I never stopped loving you, and I believed him again. Because love when you've been cold and hungry for so long feels like the only warm thing left in the world. Now kneeling in the ballroom, soaked and broken, those memories crashed over me like the water had minutes earlier. The love had been real. I had felt it in every gentle touch, every late-night conversation, every time he looked at me like I was the only thing worth protecting in his dangerous world. But tonight, he had chosen to destroy it. Or had he? The question clawed at me sharper than the cold. Because even now, as security hovered nearby, waiting for his order to drag me away, Victor hadn't moved. He stood with his back to me, shoulders rigid, fists clenched so hard the knuckles had gone white. Inside him, I knew the torment was escalating, violent, tearing, consuming. The man who had once carried me through rain because my shoes were falling apart was fighting the king who had to maintain control at any cost. The remorse was there, gnawing like acid. The love was still burning, fierce, possessive, from the very first moment he saw me in that diner, exhausted and smiling anyway. He loved me enough to ruin me. Or perhaps some small, desperate part of me dared to hope he loved me enough to break me publicly so something else could happen. Something he couldn't do alone. Outside the grand doors, another screech of tires. Raised voices. A tense standoff, words I couldn't quite catch, but the tone was unmistakable. Rivals pushing boundaries. Testing. Always testing. Victor's head turned slightly toward the sound. His jaw tightened further. The inner war raged harder. I stayed on my knees, numb, dizzy, the baby finally giving one weak kick against my palm. And in the silence that stretched between us, the suspicion grew into something sharper, more dangerous. What if this wasn't betrayal? What if this was the only way he knew to save me? The security men hesitated, their hands hovering inches from my arms, as if even they understood that touching me now might break something irreparable. I remained on my knees, the soaked velvet of my dress plastered cold against my skin, every breath shallow and trembling. The ballroom had become a frozen tableau, 800 faces caught between fascination and shame phones, still recording the massive Christmas trees glittering above us like indifferent witnesses to my unraveling. Inside my chest, the fracture deepened. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was something larger, more violent, a slow tearing collapse of everything I had dared to believe in. The baby had given one more faint kick, then nothing. The silence from within me felt louder than the whispers rippling through the crowd. My hands shook as I pressed them harder to my belly, willing her to move, willing her to forgive me for bringing her into a world that had already decided she was unwanted. Victor still hadn't turned around. His back was to me broad and unyielding beneath the perfect black tuxedo, but I could see the tension in the line of his shoulders, the way his head tilted slightly as though listening to a sound only he could hear. Outside the grand doors, the confrontation escalated again, tires squealing on wet pavement, low shouts, the sharp rev of engines. Another faction pressing their luck on a night when the city's power balance already trembled. I caught fragments Rossi's territory. Not tonight. Tell your boss to back off before. The words dissolved into the night, but the threat lingered thick as smoke. Victor's fists clenched tighter at his sides. I knew that gesture. I had seen it before on the night he had carried me out of the rain, when he'd stood between me and a group of men who thought a hungry woman alone was easy prey. He had used only words then, calm and lethal, until they scattered. But tonight his restraint felt different, thinner, more brittle, as though every second he stood here cost him pieces of himself. The numbness spread through me like frost creeping over glass. My legs had gone completely numb beneath me. Pins and needles stabbed upward, but I couldn't feel them properly. My vision tunneled the glittering lights of the chandeliers smearing into halos. Dizziness came in sick waves. I swayed, catching myself on one palm against the marble. The cold stone bit into my skin. I was so tired, bone-deep, soul-deep tired from months of sleeping in shifts on shelter cots shared with strangers, from nights when the wind howled through cracked windows, and I wrapped myself in a single threadbare blanket, whispering apologies to the baby for not being able to keep her safe. I remembered the morning 3 weeks ago when I had walked 6 blocks in sleet to the free clinic because the shelter nurse said my blood pressure was too high. The receptionist had looked at my thin coat, my cracked shoes, and asked for insurance I didn't have. I had sat in the waiting room for 4 hours, stomach cramping from hunger, only to be told to come back next month when they had funding. I had thanked the nurse politely, voice soft and timid, the way I always spoke to people who held my life in their hands. Then I walked home through the wind, tears freezing on my cheeks, wondering how much longer we could survive. And now this. Now I knelt in front of the man who had once bought me warm soup and dry socks, who had kissed my forehead and promised me a future while he declared us both mistakes. The absurdity of it pressed down like a weight. How could the same hands that had once lifted me out of despair now push me deeper into it? How could the eyes that had once looked at me with such fierce devotion now refuse to meet mine? Yet even in the numbness, suspicion flickered small. Stubborn, refusing to die, because Victor's breathing was uneven. I could see the rise and fall of his chest faster than normal. His head turned fractionally toward the doors again, as another shout echoed from outside, closer this time, more urgent. He took one step toward the sound, then stopped. His hand rose, then fell. The internal war was visible in every line of his body, the powerful man who commanded fear and respect across half the city, torn between the performance he had chosen and the love that refused to let him walk away. He loved me. I knew it in the marrow of my bones, the way you know the sun will rise even when the night feels endless. That love had burned from the first moment he saw me exhausted, smiling through fatigue, serving coffee in a stained apron. It had never dimmed. It had only grown more dangerous, more possessive, more consuming. And now it was tearing him apart from the inside, just as this moment was tearing me. Sophia laughed again, sharp and brittle, stepping closer to him. "She's still here," she said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, like a stray dog waiting for scraps. The laughter from the crowd swelled again, scattered but cruel. Someone clapped, slow mocking. Another joined. The sound wrapped around me like chains. I closed my eyes. The dizziness intensified. My head spun. The marble seemed to tilt beneath me. I leaned forward, palms flat against the floor, trying to steady myself. The baby gave the faintest flutter, barely there, but enough to pull a sob from my throat, small and broken. "Please," I whispered so softly I wasn't sure anyone could hear. "Please. Just let me go." I wasn't speaking to Sophia. I wasn't speaking to the crowd. I was speaking to him. Victor's shoulders jerked once violently, as though my words had struck him physically. He turned then, just enough for me to see half his face. His expression was shattered, eyes glassy, jaw clenched so hard a muscle ticked in his cheek, remorse and fury warring across his features in equal measure. For one heartbeat, the mask was gone completely. I saw the man who had once held me through panic attacks at 3 a.m, who had whispered that I was the only good thing he had ever touched. I saw the guilt, deep, gnawing, violent, eating him alive from within. Then the doors at the far end of the ballroom burst open with a sound like thunder. The music, if it had started again, cut off mid-note. Every head turned. 2 figures strode in, tall, dark-suited, moving with the lethal calm of men who had never known fear. Dominic and Luca Rossi, Victor's brothers. The air changed instantly. The crowd's murmurs died. Phones lowered. Even Sophia took a step back. Victor's face drained of color. Inside him, I could almost feel the shift, the violent collision of dread and desperate relief. The plan, whatever terrible, twisted plan he had set in motion, was unfolding exactly as he had intended, and it was destroying him. I stayed on my knees, soaked, shivering, numb, dizzy, heartbroken, but the spark of suspicion flared brighter. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something else entirely. And in that quiet, condensed moment of stillness before the storm truly broke, I felt the first faint stirrings of something dangerous, something I hadn't dared name since the night I fled him years ago. Hope. The double doors at the far end of the Capitale Grand Ballroom flew open with a force that echoed like a gunshot through the vaulted space. The sound cut through the lingering murmurs, the scattered laughter, the soft clink of forgotten champagne flutes. Every head turned at once. The massive crystal chandeliers overhead seemed to sway slightly from the sudden draft that rushed in with the two men. Dominic Rossi entered first. He was the older of Victor's brothers, taller, broader, built like a wall of quiet fury wrapped in flawless tailoring. His charcoal suit was cut sharp enough to draw blood, the fabric moving with him like liquid shadow. His dark hair was swept back, his face carved from the same fair, hard lines as Victor's, but where Victor's eyes usually held restrained fire, Dominic's burned openly, cold, controlled, lethal. He walked with the deliberate stride of a man who had never once doubted the ground would hold beneath him. Behind him came Luca. Younger, leaner, faster in his movements, Luca Rossi carried himself with the precision of someone who had already calculated every angle in the room before he crossed the threshold. His suit was midnight blue, almost black under the lights, and in one hand he held a slim phone thumb moving across the screen even as he walked. His fair skin caught the glow of the Christmas trees, but there was nothing warm in his expression, only a calm that felt more dangerous than rage. The jazz band had stopped playing entirely. The silence was absolute now, thick and suffocating. I remained on my knees, soaked dress, clinging arms wrapped around my belly as though it could shield the child from whatever came next. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. Dizziness still spun the edges of my vision. The marble floor felt unsteady beneath me. I wanted to stand, needed to stand, but my legs refused. They had gone numb hours ago, or perhaps days from too many nights spent standing on concrete, waiting for shelter beds that never opened, from too many shifts where I smiled through hunger until my knees buckled behind the counter. The brothers advanced through the parted sea of guests. No one dared step in their path. Phones that had been recording me moments earlier now pointed toward them, but even the boldest hesitated to press record. Whispers died before they could form. Victor turned fully now. His face was pale beneath the fair skin, the color drained as though someone had pulled a plug. His eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had once looked at me like I was the only safe place in the world, widened fractionally. Not in fear. In something far more complicated, recognition, dread, and a desperate, violent relief that twisted his features into something almost unrecognizable. Inside him, the war reached a new pitch. The love that had burned since the first night in the diner clashed against the empire he had built, against the performance he had forced himself to maintain. Remorse gnawed deeper, tearing at the walls he had erected to survive in his world. He had planned this every cruel word, every drop of water, every second of my humiliation, because he believed it was the only way to force his brother's hand, the only way to pull me back from the edge he could no longer reach alone. But seeing me here broken and shivering on the floor he had once promised to keep me from the guilt was no longer a whisper. It was a scream. Dominic reached me first. He didn't speak. He simply removed his overcoat, thick wool, lined with cashmere still warm from his body, and draped it over my shoulders with movements so careful they felt reverent. The coat smelled of pine and expensive cologne, the same scent Victor sometimes wore, and for a moment the familiarity pierced me sharper than the cold had. I clutched the lapels instinctively, pulling it tighter around me as though it could hide the soaked dress, the swollen belly, the evidence of how far I had fallen. Dominic crouched slightly, just enough to meet my eyes. His voice was low, meant only for me. "Bella," he said, using the old nickname Victor had given me years ago, the one I hadn't heard since I fled. "We're here." My throat closed. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet, not in front of them all. Luca appeared at my other side, slipping his phone into his pocket. He knelt fully heedless of the marble, and placed a gentle hand on my elbow. His touch was light, steady. "The doctor's waiting outside," he murmured. "We need to get you checked." "The baby." I nodded, small, automatic, because words wouldn't come. My voice, when it finally emerged, was soft, timid, the same tone I used when asking for mercy from landlords or shelter managers. "Thank you," I whispered. I didn't know you'd come." Luca's expression flickered something raw beneath the calm. "We never stopped watching," he said simply. Victor took one step forward, then stopped. His brothers rose as one, positioning themselves between me and him. The message was clear. Dominic's voice carried across the ballroom, quiet but cutting through the silence like a blade. "Victor." One word, loaded with years of history. Victor's chest rose and fell sharply. His hands flexed at his sides. The internal conflict was etched into every line of his body. The powerful man who had orchestrated this nightmare now faced the consequences, and they were tearing him apart. Love for me, fierce, possessive, burning from that first rainy night, clashed against the fear of losing everything he had built. Remorse surged violent and unrelenting. He wanted to cross the room to pull me into his arms, to whisper that none of this was real, that he had done it to save me from something worse. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not while the eyes of rivals and allies still watched. Outside, the confrontation flared again, louder now. Engines revved. Voices rose in sharp warning. Another faction had chosen this exact night to push boundaries, to test whether Victor Rossi's attention was divided. Tires screeched once more. A car door slammed. The tension from the street bled into the ballroom like smoke. Victor's gaze flicked toward the doors, then back to me. His eyes locked on mine for the first time since the water had fallen. In that single heartbeat, the mask shattered completely. I saw everything, the guilt that had eaten him alive since he spoke the first cruel word, the love that had never wavered, the desperate calculation that had led him to this moment. He had broken me publicly so his brothers could rescue me without pride standing in the way. He had humiliated me to protect me from threats he couldn't name aloud, not yet. The realization hit me like another wave of cold water. He hadn't betrayed me. He had sacrificed himself. My heart lurched, painful, confusing, overwhelming. Suspicion flared into something brighter, hotter, the first dangerous stirrings, of trust, of hope, of the love I had tried so hard to bury. Dominic placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you out of here." Luca helped me stand. My legs buckled at first, numb, weak from cold and hunger and shock, but they held me between them, careful, strong. The overcoat enveloped me like armor. As we moved toward the doors, I looked back once. Victor stood alone in the center of the glittering ballroom, surrounded by wealth and power, yet utterly isolated. His face was a ruin of remorse and longing. His eyes followed me, burning, desperate, filled with a love so intense it seemed to hurt him to breathe. Outside, the snow fell harder. Another shout rose from the street, tense, bold, a warning. Engines growled in response. The night was far from over, but for the first time in months, in years, perhaps, I didn't feel completely alone. Dominic's overcoat enveloped me like a shield I had never known I needed. The wool was thick, impossibly soft against my chilled skin, carrying the faint scent of pine needles and the expensive aftershave Victor sometimes wore when he thought no one was watching. It dwarfed me, sleeves hanging past my fingertips, hem brushing the tops of my cracked leather flats. I clutched the edges together over my swollen belly, suddenly aware of how thin my arms had become, how the bones of my wrists stood out sharp beneath the skin after months of rationing every bite. Luca kept his hand steady beneath my elbow as we moved toward the exit. His touch was careful, almost reverent, as though he feared I might shatter if he pressed too hard. My legs still trembled. Each step sent fresh pins and needles racing up from my numb feet. The marble floor had left faint red imprints on my knees, marks that would bruise by morning, but the pain felt distant, muffled beneath the roaring in my ears. We passed tables draped in gold-trimmed linens, crystal centerpieces filled with white roses and silver ornaments, champagne flutes half full of liquid that cost more per glass than I had earned in a month at the diner. Guests parted silently, their eyes wide, some averting their gaze in shame, others staring openly as though I were a spectacle they had paid to witness. I kept my head down, cheeks burning despite the cold that still clung to me. The soaked velvet dress beneath the coat stuck to my thighs, heavy and humiliating, a constant reminder of how far I had fallen. Outside the grand doors, the night air hit like a slap, sharp biting, carrying the scent of snow and exhaust. The snow had thickened into fat flakes that caught in my wet hair and melted against my skin. A line of black SUVs waited at the curb, engines idling low and powerful headlights cutting through the swirling white. One vehicle stood apart, sleek matte black windows tinted so dark they reflected nothing. Dominic guided me toward it. A woman in a dark coat waited beside the open rear door. "Doctor, Elena Martinez," Luca said quietly, the family physician who made house calls to penthouses and brownstones, never to shelters. She stepped forward immediately, eyes softening as she took in my state. "Let's get you inside, sweetheart," she said, voice calm and professional. "I need to check you and the baby right away." I nodded mutely, too exhausted to form words. Luca helped me into the back seat. The leather was warm. Heated seats, I realized with a dull shock. I had forgotten such things existed. The door closed with a soft, expensive thud, sealing out the wind that had once kept me awake for entire nights, huddled beneath bridges or against locked storefronts. Inside, the car smelled of clean leather and faint cedar. Soft amber lighting glowed from hidden panels. A small console between the seats held bottled water and a folded blanket cashmere. I could tell just by looking. "Doctor." Martinez settled beside me, opening a medical bag that gleamed with chrome instruments. "I'm going to take your vitals first," she said gently. "Then listen to the baby's heartbeat." Her fingers were warm against my wrist, too warm, almost foreign after so long feeling nothing but my own cold skin. She frowned slightly at my pulse. Fast, she murmured. And thready. When did you last eat? I swallowed. My voice came out small, timid, the way it always did when someone asked questions that might reveal how little I had. Yesterday. Morning. Half a protein bar. She didn't react with pity, just quiet efficiency. She wrapped a blood pressure cuff around my arm, the fabric soft against my bruised skin. The machine hummed. 140/92. High. Too high. Stress, dehydration, malnutrition, she said, more to herself than to me. We'll get an IV started once we're moving. For now, let's hear the little one. She pressed the Doppler to my belly through the wet dress and open coat. Static crackled, then thump, thump, thump. Fast, strong, defiant. A sob tore from my throat before I could stop it. Relief crashed over me so violently I swayed. The baby was alive. Fighting. Still here. Luca, seated in the front passenger seat, turned halfway. His expression cracked for the first time, something raw and unguarded flashing across his face. She's okay, he said, voice rough. You both are. Dominic slid into the driver's seat. The engine purred to life, smooth, powerful, nothing, like the rattling buses I had ridden for hours just to reach a free clinic. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. We're taking you home, he said. To the brownstone in Brooklyn, where you belong. Home. The word pierced me deeper than any of Victor's cruelty had. I had fled that house years ago, terrified of the shadows that clung to the Rossi name, convinced I could survive on my own. I had been wrong. The streets had taught me that lesson, in frostbite hunger and endless nights, when the wind felt like knives against my ribs. The car pulled away from the curb. Through the tinted windows, I saw the Capitale Grand Ballroom recede its lights, golden against the snow. A world of wealth and cruelty I no longer belonged to. But Victor remained inside that world. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass, watching the building shrink. Somewhere in there, he stood alone, surrounded by everything money could buy, yet utterly empty. The guilt I had glimpsed in his eyes had not faded. It had grown, feeding on itself, tearing at him with every breath. He had orchestrated this nightmare to force his brother's intervention, to strip away my pride, so I would accept help without fighting. And now he paid for it, standing in the glittering ruins of his own making, heart shredded by the love he could not yet claim aloud. Another confrontation erupted on the street ahead. 2 dark sedans blocked the intersection rival faction. I guessed men who had waited for this night to test Victor's divided attention. Dominic slowed but did not stop. He lowered his window just enough. Move, he said, voice flat. One of the men leaned out, smirking. Rossi's busy tonight. Tell him the docs or Dominic didn't wait for the rest. He accelerated smoothly, forcing the sedans to swerve. No collision, no violence. Just quiet, unmistakable dominance. The cars peeled away into the snow. Luca glanced back at me. They'll keep coming, he said. But not tonight. Not while we have you. The car turned onto the Brooklyn Bridge. Snow swirled around the cables like ghosts. I leaned back against the seat, exhaustion pulling me under. My eyelids drooped. The heated leather cradled me. The baby fluttered again, soft, reassuring. In the quiet hum of the engine, memories surfaced unbidden. Victor slipping $20 bills into my coat pocket when he thought I wasn't looking. Victor carrying me up 3 flights of stairs to my tiny room because my feet were blistered from cheap shoes. Victor whispering against my hair at dawn, "You're the only thing that matters." The love had always been there, fierce, burning, possessive from the very first rainy night. Now it waited on the other side of this storm. And for the first time since the water had fallen, I allowed myself to believe, however fragile, however frightened, that perhaps I wasn't the only one who had been broken tonight. Dominic's voice came soft from the front. "Rest, Elena. We've got you." I closed my eyes. The city lights blurred past, golden and distant. For the first time in years, I felt something dangerously close to safe. The black SUV glided through the snow-dusted streets of Manhattan tires, whispering over fresh powder, carrying me farther from the glittering cruelty of the Capitale Grand Ballroom with every passing block. Inside the warm cocoon of heated leather and soft amber light doctor, Martinez worked quietly, checking my pulse again, adjusting the small blanket she had draped over my legs, murmuring reassurances that the baby's heartbeat remained steady. I sat curled against the door. Dominic's overcoat still wrapped around me like borrowed armor, my soaked dress beginning to stiffen from the cold that had seeped into its fibers. My body ached in places I hadn't noticed before, bruised knees aching back the hollow gnaw of hunger that never quite left. Luca's phone buzzed once, twice. He glanced at the screen, expression unchanging. "It's started," he said quietly to Dominic. Dominic's hands tightened on the wheel, but his voice remained calm. "Good." I lifted my head, confusion threading through the numbness. What started? Luca turned in his seat just enough to meet my eyes. Victor's reckoning. The words landed softly, but they struck like stones, dropped into still water. Ripples of understanding spread through me, slow at first, then faster, colder. I pressed my palms harder against my belly, as though the baby could anchor me against what was coming. Back at the ballroom, the air had thickened into something almost solid. Victor Rossi stood alone in the center of the marble floor, the massive Christmas tree behind him, casting fractured light across his face. The 800 guests had frozen in place, champagne flutes forgotten in their hands, eyes darting between the man they had feared and admired for years, and the two brothers who now flanked him like executioners. Dominic's voice, recorded earlier, looped through the sound system Luca had remotely accessed, filled the room. Tonight you watched a pregnant woman humiliated in front of you. Some of you laughed. Most of you stayed silent. All of you chose comfort over conscience. The words echoed off marble and crystal, each one deliberate cutting. Victor did not move. His face was pale, jaw locked, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, burned with a torment so raw it seemed to consume the light around him. Inside him, the war had reached its breaking point. The love that had ignited the first rainy night in the diner clashed violently against the empire he had bled to build. He had planned every second of this nightmare, the forced kneel, the ice water, the cruel words. He had orchestrated his own destruction in public so his brothers could pull Elena from the streets without her pride refusing their help. But standing here now, watching the fallout he had engineered, the guilt was no longer gnawing, it was devouring him alive. Luca stepped forward, phone in hand, projecting a live feed onto the massive screens that usually displayed holiday greetings. The footage showed everything: Elena's trembling form, the water cascading over her, Victor's cold declaration. But now the feed split, new images appeared. Bank records, wire transfers, shell companies, names of men who controlled docks and unions and nightclubs. Evidence of embezzlement, tax evasion, hidden accounts crimes the world had long suspected but never proven. Luca's voice was calm, conversational. Victor Rossi's legitimate businesses have been built on foundations of sand. Tonight those foundations collapse. Victor's head snapped up. "Luca, you don't get to speak," Dominic cut in, voice low and final. "Not tonight." Outside the ballroom, the street confrontations escalated in waves. 3 black sedans had pulled up at the loading entrance, men from the Moretti family, longtime rivals, who had scented weakness the moment Victor's attention fractured. They stepped out, coats open, hands visible but tense. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, called up to the balcony where Victor's security usually stood. "Rossi, word is your house is divided. The docks are open for new management tonight." Victor's security, loyal but outnumbered, shifted uneasily. Inside, Luca tapped his screen once. The hotel's security system locked down. Doors sealed. Elevators froze. The Moretti men found themselves suddenly trapped between locked gates and Victor's own men, who had received new orders minutes earlier. No violence, just quiet, suffocating control. Dominic continued addressing the crowd. "As of 3 minutes ago, the unions Victor relies on have been instructed to halt all work on his projects pending federal review. His offshore accounts are frozen. The IRS has been provided with every document we've collected over the past 5 years." Victor's breathing grew ragged. He took one step forward, instinct desperation, then stopped when Dominic raised a hand. "You did this to her," Dominic said, voice softer now, meant only for his brother. "You broke her in front of the city so we could save her. But the cost is yours alone." Victor's eyes closed for one heartbeat. When they opened again, they were glassy, haunted. The love that had burned since he first saw Elena exhausted, smiling through fatigue behind a diner counter, now felt like fire in his veins. He had sacrificed everything to protect her from the streets, from the enemies who would use her as leverage, from the life he could never fully escape. And now he stood in the ruins, heart-shredded remorse, a living thing clawing at his ribs. Sophia Kane tried to slip toward the side exit. 2 of Dominic's men stepped into her path, polite, unyielding. "You're not leaving," one said quietly. Luca's voice rose again, calm and merciless. Sophia Kane advised on the asset concealment. She drafted the documents. She knew about the second set of books. The New York State Bar has already been notified. Sophia's face drained of color. She looked at Victor, waiting for rescue, for defense. He didn't look back. The screens flickered again. Live footage from the street. The Moretti men backing away, slowly, hands raised, engines starting as they retreated into the night. Another faction, smaller, hungrier, had tried to push through a side alley. Victor's secondary team met them at the corner. Words were exchanged. Phones were shown. Evidence of tonight's events was already circulating in private channels. The men retreated without a shot fired. Inside, Victor finally spoke, voice hoarse, barely audible. "Enough." The single word carried more weight than any shout. Dominic studied him for a long moment. "It was never going to be enough. You made sure of that." Victor's gaze drifted to the place on the floor where Elena had knelt. The puddle of water had begun to freeze at the edges. He stared at it as though it were blood. The inner destruction reached its peak. Love and guilt collided in violent silence. He had loved her from the first moment, passionate, intense, burning, and he had broken her to save her. Now the empire crumbled around him, piece by calculated piece, and he welcomed it. Because she was safe. Because his brothers had her. Because the streets would never touch her again. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly, Luca's final touch. A message appeared on every screen. Let this be a reminder. Silence in the face of cruelty makes you complicit. The story of tonight will be told truthfully. Or you will learn what happens when the Rossi family decides you are no longer welcome. Quiet descended. Victor stood alone in the center of his own destruction, wealthy beyond measure, powerful beyond most men's dreams, and utterly broken. Outside, the snow continued to fall. In the SUV speeding toward Brooklyn, I closed my eyes against the tears that finally came. He had done this. For me, the realization tore through me, confusing, numbing, violently beautiful. And in the stillness that followed, something inside me began to heal. The SUV moved steadily across the Brooklyn Bridge, the cables rising like silver threads against the falling snow. Each passing streetlight cast fleeting patterns across the tinted windows, illuminating my reflection in fractured glimpses. Pale cheeks, hollow eyes, hair still damp and tangled beneath Dominic's overcoat. The heated seat beneath me felt almost sinful after so many nights spent, pressed against frozen concrete, body curled tight against the wind that sliced through thin layers and stole breath and sleep alike. My stomach growled, quiet, persistent, ashamed, and I pressed a hand to it, willing the sound to stop before anyone noticed. Doctor. Martinez adjusted the IV line she had started in my arm, the clear fluid dripping slowly, carrying warmth and nutrients I hadn't tasted in weeks. She spoke in low tones to Luca about potassium levels, blood sugar, the need for rest and proper nutrition. I listened without truly hearing, my mind drifting back to the ballroom, to the man I had left standing alone in the center of his own carefully constructed ruin. Inside the Capitala Grand Ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted from stunned silence to something heavier, more suffocating. The 800 guests remained frozen in place, many still clutching champagne flutes that had long gone flat. The massive screens continued to glow with the looped footage, my soaked dress, my trembling hands shielding my belly, Victor's cold voice declaring me a mistake. But now the screens also displayed names, dates, amounts, evidence of fraud, hidden assets, tax discrepancies. Luca's media contacts had already begun the quiet dissemination, emails to journalists, private messages to key figures in the city's power structure. The story would spread like fire through dry grass by morning. Victor stood motionless, fair skin ashen beneath the chandelier light. His tuxedo remained impeccable cufflinks, catching every flicker of crystal. Yet the man inside it appeared diminished, shoulders bowed under a weight no amount of money or power could lift. The love that had ignited in him the first rainy night he saw me, passionate, intense, all-consuming, now burned like acid in his veins. Every breath carried the taste of remorse. Every heartbeat echoed the memory of my whispered plea. Victor, please. He had planned this destruction, his own mine, the spectacle to force his brother's intervention to drag me from the streets before the cold, or hunger, or the enemies circling his empire could claim me. But the cost had been steeper than even he had calculated. His gaze drifted to the small, frozen puddle where I had knelt. The ice had begun to crack under the warmth of too many bodies. He stared at it as though it were a wound he had inflicted on himself. Dominic stepped closer, voice low enough that only Victor could hear. You did what you thought you had to, he said. But don't pretend it didn't tear you apart. Victor's jaw clenched. I had no choice. You always have a choice, Dominic replied. You chose the hardest one. Luca joined them, phone still in hand. The Moretti crew just backed off the loading dock. They saw the live feed. They know the ground has shifted. Outside, the confrontations continued in quiet, tense pulses. A second group, smaller, hungrier, from a lesser family looking to carve territory, had tried to approach from the service alley. Victor's secondary security met them at the corner. No raised voices. No drawn weapons. Only calm, deliberate words, and the showing of phones displaying the unfolding footage. The men retreated, engines growling low as they melted back into the snow. Inside, Sophia Kane stood pinned near the side exit by two of Dominic's men. Her sequined gown glittered mockingly under the lights, but her face had gone pale, makeup streaking from the tears she tried to hide. She looked toward Victor, pleading, desperate. He didn't meet her eyes. Luca addressed her directly, voice carrying across the hushed room. Sophia, you advised on the offshore accounts. You helped draft the concealment documents. You knew about the second set of books. The Bar Association has been notified. Your license will be suspended pending investigation. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The fight drained from her posture. She looked small, suddenly small and afraid. Dominic turned to the crowd, raising his voice just enough to reach every corner. "Let me be very clear," he said. "Tonight you witnessed cruelty toward a pregnant woman who had already suffered more than most of you will ever understand. Some of you laughed. Some of you recorded it. Most of you did nothing. That silence makes you part of it." The room remained deathly quiet. A few heads bowed. A woman near the front wiped at her eyes. "But you have one chance to make it right," Dominic continued. "Tomorrow the full story will be published, every detail, every truth. You will help tell it accurately, or you will discover how quickly comfort can become isolation when the Rossi family turns its attention elsewhere. No threats, no raised voices. Only the quiet certainty of men who controlled more than half the city's arteries, construction unions, ports, nightlife." Victor finally spoke, voice raw. "Let them go," he said to his security. "All of them." The men stepped aside. Guests began to move slowly at first, then faster, gathering coats, avoiding eye contact. The exodus was orderly, subdued, the glittering holiday glamour stripped away until only shame remained. Victor stayed where he was. He looked at the place on the floor one last time, then turned and walked toward the side, exit alone, shoulders rigid, every step carrying the weight of the love he had nearly destroyed to save. In the SUV, I felt the car slow as we entered the familiar streets of Brooklyn. The brownstone appeared ahead, tall windows glowing warm against the snow wreaths on the doors, the faint scent of pine drifting through the cracked window when Dominic lowered it to speak to the gate guard. Luca glanced back at me. "He's going to be all right," he said quietly. "Eventually." I swallowed. My voice emerged, soft, timid, almost lost in the hum of the engine. He did this on purpose, didn't he? All of it." Dominic met my eyes in the rearview mirror. "He thought it was the only way to get you out of the cold without you fighting us every step. He thought if you hated him enough, you'd accept our help without pride standing in the way." Tears burned behind my eyes, hot, sudden, overwhelming. "He broke himself to save me," I whispered. Luca reached back, squeezing my hand gently. "He's always been willing to burn for you, Elena. From the first night." The car stopped in front of the brownstone. Warm light spilled onto the snow-covered steps. The front door opened. A housekeeper waited with blankets, hot tea slippers, small mercies that felt like miracles after years of nothing. I stepped out slowly, legs unsteady, Dr. Martinez supporting me on one side, Luca on the other. As I crossed the threshold, the warmth of the house wrapped around me like arms I had once fled. Behind me, the city continued its restless pulse, confrontations flaring and fading in the snow, power shifting in quiet, tense moments, rivals retreating under the weight of truth. But here in this moment of condensed stillness, I felt the first true crack in the numbness. Victor's love had never wavered. It had only waited fierce, burning, patient, until the cost of silence became greater than the cost of breaking. And now the breaking was done. The healing somehow had begun. The front door of the Brooklyn brownstone closed behind me with a soft, solid click that echoed through the quiet foyer like the turning of a long-locked page. Warmth enveloped me immediately. Real warmth, not the fleeting heat of a subway grate or the brief glow of a shelter radiator. It smelled of fresh pine from the enormous Christmas tree standing in the corner of the living room, its branches heavy with silver ornaments and white lights that twinkled like captured stars. A fire crackled low in the stone fireplace, casting golden patterns across polished hardwood floors. I stood there still, wrapped in Dominic's overcoat IV line carefully taped to my arm. "Doctor," Martinez guiding me with gentle pressure at my elbow. My cracked flats left faint wet prints on the rug. My soaked dress clung beneath the wool like a second shameful skin. My body felt foreign, too thin, too frail, too tired after months of nights spent curled against chain-link fences or beneath overpasses, wind cutting through threadbare layers until my bones ached with cold. Luca appeared with a thick terrycloth robe, soft gray monogrammed with a small silver R and slippers lined with shearling. He helped me shrug off the wet dress behind a folding screen in the corner movements, careful eyes averted in respect. When I emerged in the robe, the fabric felt like a cloud against my skin. I had forgotten what softness could feel like. The housekeeper, Mrs. Callahan, gray-haired and gentle-voiced, brought a tray chamomile tea steaming in a porcelain cup, buttered toast cut into triangles, a small bowl of sliced apples and cheddar. Simple things. Luxuries. I sat on the edge of the deep leather sofa, hands trembling as I lifted the cup. The first sip burned my tongue, but I drank anyway, tears slipping silently down my cheeks and into the tea. Dominic knelt in front of me, eye-level elbows resting on his knees. "You're home, Elena," he said quietly. "You don't have to fight anymore." I looked at him, really looked. The same fair skin as Victor, the same sharp jaw, but his eyes held none of the storm that always churned behind his brother's gaze. Only steady, patient sorrow. I cut you out, I whispered. My voice was soft, timid, cracked from cold and crying. I ran. I thought I could do it alone. I thought the streets would be kinder than staying in your world. Luca settled on the ottoman across from me. We never blamed you for leaving. We blamed ourselves for not making you feel safe enough to stay. The words landed gently, but they struck deep. I remembered the nights after I fled, sleeping in abandoned subway cars, waking to frost on my eyelashes, begging for change outside diners while my belly slowly grew. I remembered selling my mother's wedding ring for $25 at a pawn shop so I could buy prenatal vitamins. I remembered the shelter turning me away, because the beds were full, walking 3 miles in sleet to the next one, only to find the same answer. I remembered whispering to the baby in the dark, promising her things I couldn't deliver. And all the while, these men, Victor's brothers, had watched from afar. Luca had paid my hospital bills anonymously when complications arose. Dominic had quietly rerouted threats away from the shelters I used. They had never forced their way back in. They had waited. Because they loved me. Because Victor loved me. The realization rose like a tide, slow, overwhelming, violent in its tenderness. I set the cup down, hands shaking so hard tea sloshed over the rim. He did it all on purpose, I said again, voice barely above a whisper. He broke me so you could save me. Dominic nodded once. He thought it was the only way. Pride was the last thing keeping you on the streets. He decided to take it away himself. Tears came harder now, hot, unstoppable. I pressed my palms to my eyes, shoulders heaving. The robe slipped from one shoulder. I didn't care. He hates himself for it, Luca said quietly. More than you'll ever know. I looked up at them, vision blurred. I don't hate him, I whispered. I can't. I tried. God, I tried. But every time I close my eyes, I see the way he looked at me tonight like he was the one drowning. Dominic reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from my forehead. The gesture was so tender, so careful, it shattered something inside me. He's always been drowning for you, he said. From the first night he walked into that diner and saw you smiling through exhaustion. He fell in love right then, hard, fast, burning. He never stopped. The fire popped softly. The Christmas lights blinked in quiet rhythm. For the first time in years, silence felt safe instead of threatening. Mrs. Callahan returned with a tray of warm washcloths and a bowl of lavender-scented water. She knelt beside me, gently wiping the last traces of dried tears and melted snow from my face. Her hands were lined, steady, motherly. I let her, too tired to protest. Afterward, Dr. Martinez checked me again, blood pressure dropping, pulse steadying. She started a second IV bag of nutrients. You need sleep, she said. Real sleep. Not the kind you steal on benches or in doorways. I nodded. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy. Luca stood. Your room is upstairs. Same one as before. We never changed it. I let them help me rise. My legs still wobbled, but the numbness had begun to thaw, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion that felt almost like relief. The staircase was wide, carpeted in deep burgundy. Each step upward felt like climbing out of a grave I had lived in for too long. At the landing, the hallway stretched quiet and warm, doors closed, sconces glowing softly. My old room waited at the end. The door opened to pale blue walls, a 4-poster bed piled with down comforters, a window overlooking the snow-covered garden. A small crib stood in the corner, new white wood, a soft mobile of stars and moons turning slowly above it. I stopped in the doorway, breath-catching. Dominic spoke from behind me. We knew the baby was coming. We prepared. Tears again, quiet this time, cleansing. I crossed the threshold. The rug was thick beneath my slippers. The air smelled faintly of lavender. I sank onto the edge of the bedrobe, pooling around me. Luca knelt beside me, voice low. Victor will come when he can. When he's ready to face you without the mask. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the same quiet torment that had lived in Victor's eyes tonight. He's suffering, I said. Luca nodded. He deserves to. But he'll heal. You both will. They left me then, soft footsteps, retreating door closing with a gentle click. I lay back against the pillows. The mattress cradled me like arms I had forgotten. The down comforter settled over me, heavy and warm. For the first time in years, I didn't have to sleep with one eye open, listening for footsteps or sirens or wind that might steal my breath. My hand rested on my belly. The baby moved slow, strong, reassuring. Outside, snow continued to fall over Brooklyn, over Manhattan, over the city that had tried to break us both. Somewhere in that city, Victor Rossi walked through the aftermath of his own making, wealthy, powerful, utterly alone. And inside him, the love that had burned since the first rainy night continued to burn, fierce, patient waiting. In the quiet of the brownstone, surrounded by light and warmth I had once rejected, I closed my eyes. The storm had passed. Healing had begun. 3 days had passed since the night of the Christmas party, yet time inside the brownstone felt suspended, like snow caught mid-fall. I moved through the rooms in a quiet daze, soft slippers whispering over hardwood, thick robes replacing the rags I had once worn, meals appearing on silver trays without my ever asking. My body began to remember what fullness felt like. The hollows beneath my eyes softened. The baby kicked stronger every day, as though celebrating the sudden abundance of warmth and safety. But my heart remained cracked wide open. Victor had not come. He had not called, not sent word, not appeared in the doorway with that haunted look I now understood too well. The silence from him was a living thing, heavy, suffocating, tearing at me from the inside with every hour that passed. I stood at the nursery window for hours, watching snow blanket the garden, wondering if he was somewhere out there in the cold he had once shielded me from. On the 4th night, the front door opened downstairs with the soft finality of a judge's gavel. I knew it was him before I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken apologies. My breath caught. My hands pressed to my belly as though to steady the sudden, frantic flutter inside. Dominic and Luca had left the living room lights low. The Christmas tree still glowed white lights, reflecting off crystal ornaments like tears frozen in time. Victor stood just inside the doorway, snow melting from his dark overcoat, fair skin almost translucent under the warm glow. He looked thinner, eyes shadowed, the powerful lines of his face etched deeper by exhaustion, and something far worse, self-loathing, so profound it seemed to radiate from him like heat. He did not move further into the room. I stood at the foot of the stairs in one of his old cashmere sweaters and soft leggings, barefoot hair loose and finally clean. The disparity between us had never been clearer: the Mafia king who owned half the city's shadows, and the woman who weeks ago had sold her blood for bus fare. He looked at me as though I were a miracle he no longer deserved to touch. "Elena," he said, voice rough, broken open. The single word tore the last of my defenses away. I took one step down, then another. My legs trembled not from weakness now, but from the violent surge of everything I had tried to bury: love, fury, terror, longing. It rose like a tide, threatening to drown me. Victor's hands clenched at his sides. His chest rose and fell too fast. Inside him, the storm that had raged since the night of the party reached its final devastating crescendo. The love that had ignited the moment he saw me tired, smiling, pouring coffee with shaking hands had never dimmed. It had only grown darker, more desperate, more possessive. He had orchestrated every cruel second of the humiliation because he believed it was the only way to force his brothers to intervene when his own pride and my stubbornness would have kept me on the streets until the cold took us both. And now he stood in the ruins of that choice heart, shredded, waiting for judgment. I reached the bottom step. He dropped to his knees. The sound of expensive wool hitting hardwood echoed through the quiet house. His head bowed. Shoulders shook, once hard, involuntary. "I staged it all," he rasped. "The water, the words. Sophia, she was never anything to me. A prop, a tool. I paid her, threatened her, whatever it took. I needed you to hate me enough to let them save you." The confession hung between us, raw and bleeding. I stared at him, at the man who had carried me through rain, who had fed me when I was too proud to ask, who had whispered poetry against my skin in the dark, and felt my world tilt violently. "You planned my humiliation." My voice came out small, cracked, the same timid whisper I had used on the streets when asking strangers for mercy. He lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, glassy with tears he refused to let fall. "I planned my own destruction," he said. "I burned everything: reputation, alliances, freedom, so you would never spend another night cold. So our child would never know hunger. I would do it 1,000 times worse if it meant you were here. Safe, alive." The room spun. I gripped the banister to stay upright. Shock crashed over me in freezing waves, followed by a rush of understanding so painful it stole my breath. He had loved me enough to become the villain in my story. He had loved me enough to break himself so completely that I would finally accept the protection I had once rejected. Tears blurred my vision. My knees buckled. Victor surged forward, catching me before I hit the floor, arms wrapping around me with desperate strength. He smelled of snow and expensive wool, and the same cologne that had once clung to the coat he gave me on our first night. His body shook against mine. "There's more," he whispered, against my hair, voice cracking. "The baby. I know she's not mine. Not biologically. I've known for months. I had Luca pull the clinic records when you started showing. The timing, after you left me, the final blow landed softly, devastatingly. I went very still in his arms. He pulled back just enough to look at me, eyes wild with fear and love, and a ferocity that stole my breath. "I don't care," he said fiercely. "She's mine. She's ours. I will love her with every breath I have left. I will be her father in every way that matters." Blood means nothing. You are everything. The world narrowed to the space between us. Every moment of poverty, every night of wind and hunger, every unfair, brutal thing the streets had done to me, none of it mattered anymore. Because this man, this dangerous, powerful, broken man, had sacrificed his empire, his pride, his very soul to pull me from that darkness. And he was offering me the one thing I had never dared dream of again, a future built not on fear, but on a love so fierce it had survived even his own cruelty. I cupped his face with trembling hands. His skin was cold from the snow, but his tears were hot against my palms. "I hated you," I whispered. "For 3 days I hated you so much it hurt to breathe." I know he choked, but I never stopped loving you. Not once. Not even when the water was pouring over me. Not even when you turned away. I saw it in your eyes, Victor. I saw you breaking. He made a sound half sob, half prayer, and pressed his forehead to mine. "Forgive me," he begged. "God, Elena, forgive me." I kissed him instead. It was not gentle. It was not soft. It was every tear, every scream, every night of cold and hunger and terror pouring out in one desperate, consuming clash of mouths. His arms crushed me to him, as though he feared I would vanish. My fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, closer, until there was no space left for pain or pride or past mistakes. The love that had waited, patient, burning, violent, finally broke free. Behind us, the Christmas tree lights flickered once as though the house itself sighed in relief. Outside, snow continued to fall over the city that had tried to destroy us. Inside, 2 broken souls began slowly, fiercely, impossibly to put each other back together. The kiss that followed Victor's confession was fierce and all-consuming, a raw collision of years of longing, pain, guilt, and unbreakable devotion. His arms locked around me as if releasing me would shatter everything. I clung to his snow-damp coat, pulling him impossibly closer until no space remained for doubt or distance. When we finally broke apart, gasping foreheads pressed together, his breath shuddered. His tears fell hot against my skin. "I thought I'd lost you forever," he whispered hoarsely. "Every night you spent cold, hungry, alone, I felt it like a blade in my chest. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't breathe. So I tore down my entire world in one night, tore myself down, just so you would finally be safe." I cradled his face, thumbs wiping the tracks beneath his eyes. "You never lost me," I said softly. "Even when I hated you, I loved you more. Through every freezing night, every empty stomach, every whispered promise to our baby that we'd survive, I still loved you. Because deep down, I always knew you were still out there loving me back, even if it destroyed you." The fire crackled gently. The Christmas lights blinked in slow, soothing rhythm. For long minutes, we simply held each other, 2 fractured souls finally allowed to become whole again in the same breath. Later, we sat before the hearth, Victor drawing me between his knees, wrapping us both in a thick wool throw. His hands rested protectively over my belly. The baby kicked strongly, and he laughed, a small, cracked sound of pure wonder. "She knows her father's voice," I murmured. "She knows she's finally safe," he answered. We spoke then, quietly, haltingly, of everything we had buried. He confessed the nights he drove past shelters, watching from the shadows to ensure my safety, the anonymous donations to clinics, the cash slipped into donation boxes for prenatal care, the nightmares that woke him, gasping, terrified he'd find me frozen under a bridge. I told him about crying silently into my sleeve so no one would hear, selling my mother's locket for bus fare, thanking strangers for single dollars with the same timid politeness I once used on caseworkers. Every kick from the baby had felt like both promise and punishment, proof of life, proof of my failure to protect her. And through it all, love endured. Not the shallow, glittering love money can buy. The fierce, stubborn, bone-deep love that survives hunger, cold, betrayal, and self-destruction. The kind that proves love recognizes no color, no class, no price. True love and compassion cannot be separated by wealth or poverty. This story teaches us the profound knowledge that real love often demands the greatest sacrifice. Victor destroyed his own image and empire to save Elena from the streets, showing that sometimes protecting someone you love means letting them hate you first. It is a powerful lesson in selfless devotion. True love isn't always beautiful in the moment. Sometimes it's painful, messy, and misunderstood. This is an important part of education in life, learning that the deepest affection may require us to suffer, so the person we cherish can heal and thrive. Another valuable knowledge revealed here is that forgiveness can mend even the deepest wounds. Elena's ability to see through Victor's cruelty to the desperate love beneath it reminds us that understanding motive changes everything. This is a vital lesson. Holding on to hatred poisons us, while choosing compassion frees us both. It forms a core piece of education in emotional maturity, realizing that people who hurt us most may be acting out of their own unbearable pain. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is strength that heals generations, The story also imparts knowledge that love transcends blood status and circumstance. Victor embraced a child not biologically his own with complete devotion, proving family is built by choice and commitment, not DNA. This beautiful lesson teaches us that true belonging comes from actions, not origins. It is an essential education for modern life in a divided world. Choosing to love unconditionally, regardless of background, skin color, or wealth, creates the strongest, most enduring bonds. Compassion knows no boundaries. To everyone watching this video, may you be blessed with good health, a joyful life, and daily peace. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the YouTube channel Alex Truths, like this video, and share it so more people can experience these heartfelt stories every day. How did this story make you feel? Does it remind you of anything in your own life? Please share your emotions in the comments below. I read every one and truly listen to the feelings deep in your hearts. Thank you for joining me today. Goodbye for now, and I promise I'll see you again in the next video. Disclaimer: all stories on this channel are fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.